But I like when people watch my films, they come back with their own visions of what I wanted to say.
Filmmaking for me is a way of connecting to others.
My hope for the GH6 is that it's a camera I can just like have with me in every moment and just capture it in a way that I feel free.
能够找到同好，能在创作的路上有一同前进的人是非常幸福的一件事。
マイクロフォーサーズのシステムでさらに進化してくれるっていうのはずっと待ち望んでいたことですね。
Panasonic has a great reputation of always making leaps and bounds improvements that are appropriate for the time and the situations, and so we're really excited to see how Panasonic is going to pivot with this new camera.
I'm happy with the GH5s. I use them all the time, and I'm hoping the GH6 goes to the next level.
Hi, I'm Frederick Van Johnson, photographer and podcaster, and the guy behind the This Week in Photo podcast. I'd like to thank you for joining this live stream. As you might imagine, today is an exciting day for the LUMIX team and for creators everywhere. Since the beginning, LUMIX has been a world leader in digital imaging innovation, from the introduction of the world's first digital single-lens mirrorless camera to the addition of a host of innovations and video firsts in the celebrated GH series of cameras. Today is the introduction of the brand new flagship camera in our LUMIX GH line, the GH6. We've always valued the vision of filmmakers and cinematographers, just like what you watched in that introduction video. Listening to creators about their creative self-expression requirements has always been the top priority when developing LUMIX cameras. And now, the LUMIX team is proud to unveil the next stage in the evolution of the GH series, the GH6. The Micro Four Thirds system is already extremely well suited for video production, and GH6 will create even more creative possibilities. In short, the GH6 introduces an exciting new creative dimension featuring a broader range of creative features and mobile capabilities. Here are some of the exciting new features and capabilities of the GH6. The GH6 has adopted a new live MOS sensor and a new Venus engine. The sensor resolution has been increased by more than 20% compared to GH5 to 25.2 megapixels, with higher resolution, higher speed signal readout, and wider dynamic range. Dual IS2 capabilities have increased to 7.5 stops. New advanced image processing technology provides high resolution and natural noise reproduction, as well as the rich, expressive color reproduction that LUMIX is known for. The LUMIX GH6 contains built-in V-Log V-Gamut LUTs for the first time in LUMIX G Micro Four Thirds cameras, and provides a stunning 12 plus stops of dynamic range and up to 13 plus stops of wide dynamic range using dynamic range boost mode. The new LUMIX GH6 changes the game again with 422 10-bit C4K 60p and unlimited recording time. 420 10-bit 4K 120p and 422 10-bit FHD 240p HFR or high frame rate. GH6 can record FHD at a maximum of 300 frames per second VFR or variable frame rate. In addition to 420 10-bit 5.7K 60p, 420 10-bit 5.8K 30p or 4.4K 60p, anamorphic 4:3 video can be recorded utilizing the full area of the sensor. And the GH6 can display de-squeezed anamorphic footage on the monitor in real time. 5.7K 30p video recording is available in ProRes 422 HQ. This is a first for LUMIX. The highly mobile body is equipped with a variety of video recording formats covering everything from filming to post-production workflow. The GH6 features the high mobility, power, and rich functionality required in today's video industry. The LUMIX team's goal is to enable new paths of creativity in video production while creating a new market for the industry. We'll do this together with all creators seeking new power and video expression. Panasonic is proud to offer cameras with such high reliability that can be trusted by professional creatives everywhere. During the development of GH6, we've worked closely with director and cinematographer Jacob Schwartz from Mystery Box. Let's hear his first impressions of this new camera.
So my name is Jacob Schwartz. I'm a filmmaker that's based here in Salt Lake City, Utah. I think the GH6 was super essential to this project, and it worked really well for this project because what we needed was a small camera that was very versatile and could work quickly, especially when we're dealing with COVID, where we're always still trying to battle a lot of different variables and trying to battle a lot of different unforeseen circumstances. It was a quick and fast tool that allowed us to shoot quickly and efficiently and tell our story without having to have all of the overhead that we usually have with typical film productions. For the most part, we shot everything, actually for everything, we shot at the new 5.7 ProRes HQ format at 2398. We felt that was the best format that we could do. Again, we are huge fans of having our content future-proofed as well as having the flexibility of changing stuff in post. I know that there's a lot of cinematographers out there that's like, frame it for what it needs and it is what it is, but we are huge advocates of windowing our frame. And so having the 5.7 resolution allows us to just have that flexibility of saying, you know what, if we have to reframe or adjust that pan or push in or stabilize that image for any reason at all, we have that extra resolution to do that with. That was such a great, feature of the camera that we really appreciated. The great thing that we loved the most about how the LUMIX GH6 camera introduced ProRes into its new camera was ProRes is like the universal standard codec for most all post houses. Not having to deal with converting and cross-converting from different codecs that are more efficient on DIA cameras, having ProRes built in has just been invaluable, especially as it comes to post. We have a few scenes that are green screen, and we also have a few scenes that are just going to need that extra bit of bit depth we've grown accustomed to with ProRes. We definitely use the dynamic range boost on the new GH6. And especially with us shooting out in nature where we don't have as much control of the light and where we're trying to do a lot of different balancing between our shadows and highlights, having that extra dynamic range was super invaluable, especially out in the desert. We were super impressed with the IBIS. I'm excited as we got back into the post room, how stable the images were when we were shooting in handheld with IBIS. The GH6 was invaluable because it allowed us to take a story that could have been really complex and overbearing and now allow us to shoot it in a very short time frame, but also retain the image quality that we are used to with some of the bigger camera systems. And so especially now with the ProRes and especially now with the new CF Express card format, it all kind of worked beautifully into our ecosystem here at Mystery Box and Paradox Post of taking the project from conception all the way through delivery.
All right, thank you, Jacob. It's great to hear some of the new features are being appreciated on the new GH6. The recommended retail price for GH6 will be $21.99 USD and €21.99 Euro. And future GH6 performance enhancements will be delivered via firmware updates, and we'll continue to update the camera features based on the needs of our customers. LUMIX has always placed importance on creating cameras that enable new video expression. We know creators will love the new GH6 and the new creative possibilities this amazing new camera brings. Stand by for a live Q&A session with Matt Fraser and Sean Robinson from the LUMIX team.
All right, everybody. This is such an exciting announcement from Panasonic LUMIX. As you all know, the GH6 is finally here, and we are now being joined by Matt Fraser to actually talk about it and address the questions that all of you may have in the chat. What's up, Matt?
Hey, Sean. I'm sure you haven't been very busy today. I was just lounging in the backyard. Nothing to worry about.
This has been how many years in the making for so many people in the chat. Just such a crazy amount of time for how long we've been waiting for this. And dude, I'm so excited that we can actually talk about this now.
Yeah, that makes two of us. Obviously, we've been sitting on a lot of information. I'm sure people have questions, and we got answers. So let's get into it. Let's get into this project and let everybody know what's going on.
Yeah, so to let everybody know that is tuning in for the Q&A part of this, if you have a question, and we're watching on the LUMIX USA channel here, at least for the questions here. I think we are also watching over on the Panasonic LUMIX Videos channel as well. Tag either at LUMIX Cameras or Panasonic LUMIX Video, depending on which page you're viewing this on, so we can see it pop up here in the chat, and we can get to your questions. So yeah, let's kind of
it's really
while
easy. It's really easy to read all the questions right now. They're flying by.
Yeah.
There's only 2,000 people here. So
couple words of comment that I am going to put out there right now. If you spam the chat with the same question and the same word over and over again, you will be put in timeout. Because it starts to massively just fill in the thing here. So, all right, a couple of the questions that have come up so far. Obviously, everyone is asking about autofocus in the camera, so I think we do have to at least talk a little bit about the autofocus, and then we're going to move on from that. We're not going to spend an hour talking about autofocus. You want to chime in, Matt?
Why don't we just get this? Yeah, let's just get this out of the way. So obviously, now that everybody sees, it uses the contrast-based autofocus system. It's DFD based. I am well aware it's not the direction that people were hoping that we would go. So I'd first urge you to take a look at the wealth of review videos that'll be coming out with the camera. Ultimately, they'll help to give you some guidance as to whether or not there's a meaningful improvement in the autofocus system or not. I want to make sure everybody understands why we went down the path that we did. So you have to remember that when we're developing or working on a sensor design, we're working on the information based on an older camera. You know, we're working on this around the GH4's timeline when you're working on that new sensor. And so you're working on the concerns of that sensor at that point. So low light sensitivity, dynamic range, resolution, those are the things people were most concerned about. Obviously, we pay attention. We know people are looking for a PDAF solution. We've worked on improving the DFD autofocus system for a number of years. Ultimately, in order to give the picture quality improvements that this new sensor has to offer with its faster readout speed, with the dynamic range boost function, which I think people are going to be very impressed with the overall image quality of the sensor. It is a substantial improvement over the GH5, and realistically, it has more dynamic range than a GH5S. So you and I have been explaining to a lot of people that this is really sort of an homogenization of the GH5S concept and the GH5 concept in a single camera body. The low light sensitivity is clearly superior to the GH5. It is very competitive to the GH5S. And so at the end of the day, when we were working on this sensor design and eventually went to incorporate it, it just wasn't possible for us to get a modification for phase-based autofocus. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that we aren't investigating phase-based autofocus systems or time-of-flight autofocus systems, or maybe something really cool that none of us have ever heard of before. But at this time, with this camera, this is what we're going to be able to offer. And so hopefully that explains the situation. I know it's not what people wanted, but please take a look at the image, and more importantly, take a look at the autofocus system tests that are out there.
Yeah. Now, that's
so
I
let's
think
get that out of the way.
Yeah, as some people were pointing out here, we just got rushed with all of that one-word comment. So yeah, now we've spoken about that, we're going to move on to some of the other really cool stuff, because there are so many questions in here that I think we really want to get to and get you guys answers for. One of the ones that I just saw here was from Aiden McNally, is asking, are the GH5 batteries compatible with the GH6, obviously? And short answer, yes, they are. You can use BLF19 batteries in the GH6. However, there will be some limitations to what that battery is capable of powering in the GH6. Some of the different modes are going to require the newer battery, the BLK22, to be able to actually operate them. And I think one of the big points, too, is that, you know, all of these questions, we're going to give you the best answers we can as of right now for this first hour that this camera is live and known in the public. But over the next month, we're going to be doing a ton of streams here too. So, you know, we'll be answering a lot of these questions and showing more in-depth demonstrations than just the conversations here. But Matt, if there's anything you want to add in, just jump right in.
Yeah, so let me explain a little bit deeper on the battery. So it's going to use the Model 22 battery that'll come with the camera, obviously. It technically has a higher voltage threshold, which means lower current going into the camera, a lower thermal threshold. So any recording modes that cause the camera to get hotter, like 4K 120, 5.7K 60p, those aren't going to be available with the the 19 battery. So I jokingly say, if you'd like to turn a GH6 into a GH5, use the GH5's battery, and that's about what you're going to get out of the camera. So keep in mind though, DR boost, dynamic range boost will still work on the old battery as well. So there's still a lot you can do with the old battery, but obviously you're going to get the most out of the camera with the new one.
Yeah. So let's see here. A couple other questions that came in. There were a lot of questions about the actual memory card layout with this camera and how things are going to work together. I know that reading obviously some of the chat questions here and some of the comments that we've seen in different locations online, there's some concerns about backup recording, relay recording, things that we've been doing in the GH line of camera for a long time. But as the simple answer, we can say most modes, as long as you're not having to use just the CF Express card because of the bit rate, you can still back up and relay record to both of those media devices.
And I want to clarify something on this too, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. So ProRes, it eats a lot of data. I don't think there's any question about that. It's like over 1900 megabits per second. That's got to go to the CF Express card. But we have all intra codecs in the camera that will support up to 4K 60p all intra at up to 600 megabits per second. That can go to both the CF Express card and a V90 card at the same time. So you're going to have opportunity, like 5.7K will be able to go to both cards. There's an option for 5.7K at 300 megabits per second that can go to both cards as well. So just be aware that you don't have to use ProRes, obviously. If you're a GH owner that is currently using our all inter codecs, you know that they do an awesome job as is. Same with our IPB codecs. And so even things like 4K 120, you have 4K 120 options that will go to the SD card and the CF Express card at the same time. Just once we get to 800 megabit, when you see an 800 megabit codec, that's going to require CF Express card. And keep in mind that we have announced that there will be a firmware update to the camera. And one of the things we're going to support is the external USB to SSD. So you'll be able to use an external media for recording as well. There's still a lot we don't yet know about what that can support. But at a minimum, you're going to have external media that you'll be able to work with the product as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and talking about that too, some of the future stuff that's coming on, because we've gotten a lot of questions about future firmware updates, because I think as you have often said, Matt, it wouldn't be a LUMIX launch if there wasn't firmware already planned for it. There will be support for things like RAW over HDMI coming in the future. The SSD recording over USB, even more ProRes options in the camera. At launch, the camera is shipping with 5.7K ProRes 422 and HQ up to 5.7K 30p. That's what it ships at in 5.7K. Our firmware update that's going to be coming will supply DCI 4K, full HD options. And Matt, I think you have a little bit of insight as to the kind of the thought process behind that at launch.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think what people have to understand is that there's a lot of testing that has to happen whenever we put new codecs in. It's a lot of engineering time that has to go into this. So we wanted to make sure we were providing the absolute highest quality image from the camera that it was capable of achieving for ProRes. And then on top of that, as we go down the line, we'll be able to add in like 4K, in a DCI format, and we'll also add full high definition. We have other things planned as well. I think what's most interesting to me about the firmware update is the reason why 4K 120 didn't make it for launch, which it's kind of a funny story because it takes time to test these things. And we quickly figured out there are currently no recorders that support HDMI 2.1 at 4K 120 frames. So it didn't make any sense for us to make the investment in having that ready when the only thing you could do is hook it up to your television or your computer monitor and kind of take selfies of yourself on the screen at 120 frames per second. So that's one of the reasons why that's not going to be in the camera yet. It just didn't make sense to put the time into it until there's something that can record it. That's how forward-looking the camera really is. But then you also look at the fact that Atomos is using a non-standardized 120 4K for RAW. And so we are now working on making sure we can do 4K 120 over HDMI so people can record the raw output to an Atomos Ninja 5 Plus, which again, we're working to make that happen. So just be aware that we have a lot planned for this camera. If anybody remembers the history of the GH5, you know there's an awful lot of stuff running in the back of our heads that Sean and I can't even talk about right now about what we have planned for additions in the future.
Yeah. So let's see. I'm going to pull up another question here. It's from Sam Goose. Wants to know release date, raw output, which we just addressed, and then the photography side of this camera, something that I am really excited about with the GH6. But start with release date. Release date is going to be end of March, right? January, February. Yeah, March, next month.
Right.
Man,
it's a month that starts with an M. Yeah. You got like M months. You got two shots. You got two shots out of Sean. So
So the camera will be shipping by next month. And I think probably one of the coolest things, Matt, is a lot of the different regions that you can be buying this camera in all have some sort of promotion running for the pre-orders at the start of the camera's release. So if you take a look at least here in the United States, is the only one that I can speak of, at least because, you know, we're here in the United States. In the United States, when you pre-order the GH6, you're getting a free CF Express Type B card with the camera. So you're not having to go spend $200 to go get a CF Express card at the time that you buy the camera. So that's what I know, at least in the US. Some other regions are also doing that promotion. Some other regions are doing maybe some different like cashback promotion, stuff like that. So take a look at your local store, wherever you're purchasing your camera equipment from. Double check, see what kind of promotions they've got going on there, because there's definitely something going on in the different regions across the globe. So knowing that CF Express is a newer format for a number of people out there, it's a really big thing to make sure that, you know, so that you can get the most out of the camera when you pick it up. You're going to have a card that can take advantage of every single aspect that the GH6 is offering you. So really, really solid there.
Well, and keep in mind that we obviously know our future roadmaps. So we're making sure we're giving away a card that is ready not just for what the camera can do today, but what we have planned in the future for the product. So we're not going to, you know, saddle you with a card that when we add something really cool, you won't be able to use it anymore. So trust me, it's plenty fast enough for anything we're doing in the future.
Yeah. And then also to the last part of the question from Sam was about the photography options. You know, obviously we're talking so much about the video side of this camera, and I don't think any of us can deny the GH6 is going to be loved and adopted by a vast majority of filmmakers and video content creators. But we get so many people that have questions about, what about photography with LUMIX? You know, what's the logic here with our brand and photographers? And I can tell you, hands down, this is one of the best photography tools I've used to date, and I have access to every single one of our cameras. The full frame cameras, the S series, I love them to death. I have a converted S1R because I want to shoot infrared. I've got, you know, the S5. I know, Matt, you and I have talked about this a lot. You know, the S cameras, they're awesome for photography when you want that full frame look and you're trying to go for that particular style. But as far as this new sensor and this processor, I have been floored by the noise level that this sensor doesn't produce, I guess is a way that I can word that. It's so clean. Yeah, it's so clean all the way up through the range, and the amount of detail that this sensor retains, and probably the best part, it's an actual sensor resolution increase in micro four thirds. We're up to 25 megapixels. You're not stuck at 20 megapixels anymore. And alongside that, you're still getting really fast burst rates for still shooting. You're getting up to 75 frames per second with a buffer that's about 200 shots in the buffer. So you're not going to only get less than a second worth of shooting and then have the camera have to clear the buffer out. You get a long time of shooting with it.
And more than 200 images that we're getting, more than 200 images on CF Express cards. So it's got a great buffer. I think this is probably a good time to talk about DR boost, because my opinion is that the biggest gain for a micro four thirds shooter, well, going up, 20% resolution from 20 megapixels to 25 is a big increase. The dynamic range boost feature, I think, is going to be the part that really shocks some people at the image quality. And so I want to make sure everybody understands that DR boost is not just a video feature. It is a photographic feature as well. It is inherent within the sensor design. So just a very quick explanation of how this works. We capture a single frame of image information, and it's sent into 2 gain stages. You're going to have what we call a high gain stage, which will give us really clean shadows, but it's going to clip the highlights very quickly. So you're gaining up that image for clean shadows. And then we take a low gain stage, which has lots of dynamic range, more than a stop more. I mean, it's a 1 stop more dynamic range than any Micro Four Thirds camera we've ever introduced. So you get better highlight information, but that would create noisy shadows. And so what we effectively do is we take the clean shadows from the high gain stage and we inject them into the noisy shadows of the low gain. And that creates a very high dynamic range image, but it has very clean shadows. And so that's the part that I'm really excited about, is how clean these files look when you process them. And Sean and I have been working within the Silky Pix app, which is the application that we can use right now for processing raw files. We're not just looking at the JPEG engine, which has huge improvements in terms of its noise reduction as well. We're seeing an incredibly clean image, things we've never seen in a Micro Four Thirds camera. I think it would be safe to assume that this might be one of the best sensors available in crop sensor cameras. And so I think people are going to be blown away by that image quality. Now, keep in mind, there are some limitations. This only works up to 60 frames per second, and that's in any video mode. So it doesn't matter if it's 5.7K, 4K, 1080p, it doesn't matter. It's 60 frames is 60 frames. But this is also the case for photography. So you're going to see we have these 2 burst modes. We have a 60 frame burst and we have a 75 frame burst. And a lot of you are probably going, why would Panasonic do this? There's like a 15 frame difference and the buffer is basically the same. Why were you guys doing this? And it's pretty simple. 60 frames per second is the limit for DR boost, dynamic range boost. 75 frames per second is the throughput of the engine with all the other things that are going on with the autofocus system. So we can give you a maximum of 75 frames. That's going to be without DR boost. So that 60 frame is what gives you your DR boost function. And so for photographers, this is, I think, one of the biggest returns on this camera is that extra dynamic range and those cleaner shadows. Obviously, video shooters will appreciate that as well, because we're applying a 3D noise reduction algorithm, which means we get what's called temporal noise reduction. We can compare the first frame and the third frame to the second frame that we're capturing, and we're looking for noise in those frames that's moving, and that gives us the ability to cancel it out and clean up the image. And so you're going to get really clean video images from this camera, especially in the DR boost mode.
Yeah. It's such a cool, technology. Actually, when we first started getting the, the materials so we could do trainings and stuff like that to get like even our own team up to speed on this, it's crazy how much stuff our engineers have packed into this. And I can tell you, for what it's worth, I mean, as everyone knows, this is a LUMIX stream. We're both employees of Panasonic LUMIX here in the US. But both of us are passionate photographers and videographers outside of this job. And this has been one of the most fun cameras I've legitimately been able to shoot with. There's a reason why the 3 lenses I have tattooed on me are Micro Four Thirds lenses. Part of it's because we didn't have the S series out at the time. But a lot of it's that, I get to go back to using my Nocticron. I get to use the 42.5 with it and actually shoot with a camera that, up until recently, I loved shooting on the G9 when I would go back to my Micro Four Thirds cameras. This camera feels like the perfect mix of the G9 ergonomic-wise and into the full, GH series with all the video features. I don't have to worry about which camera I want to take anymore. It is such an amazing stills camera. And probably the coolest thing, which we didn't really talk about too much in the launch, it has the S1H style rear screen on it. So we can flip it out, have tilt. So all of you that love tilt screens, you've got a tilt screen. And everyone that likes vari-angle screens, you got a vari-angle screen. And then now it doesn't actually get in the way of any of the ports on the side. It's just so much fun to use. I'm so excited.
Well, and I noticed some venting on the side of it. I'm sure that's that's created
Yes.
probably a little bit of controversy as well. So
Yes, it has.
yes, there's vents. There's vents on the side. There's a fan internally, and so I know that there's some questions about weather resistance when it comes to the fan. So I think it's important to understand that what we've formed is a plenum. It's a tube basically where the fan resides, and there's a heat sink that's pulling heat, and the heat's actually coming out. The fan is cooling the sensor. I'm sorry, no, the fan is cooling the engine, and the fan is cooling the CF Express card.
Yes.
The chassis of the camera is actually cooling the sensor. So there's a separate passive cooling for sensor. It's active cooling for engine and CF Express card. That whole case where your camera's guts live is completely sealed away from the fan. So there's no way water, unless if you submerge the thing, that would be a problem. But if you got rain, snow, things like that, that are, not ridiculous downpours, you shouldn't have any issues. Also keep in mind the LCD screen is a sealed system as well. So it's just the plenum. And then I realize there's some questions about the fan's reliability and durability. In truth, the S1H has a fan-based cooling system. The box cameras, both the BGH1 and the BS1H, have fan-based cooling systems. These are coreless motor designs. So they don't have they don't have like an iron core that has copper wiring wrapped around it. It's effectively a magnet field that's floating and spinning. It's like a maglev train for a fan. That's effectively what's in there. So it is a weather-proofed device as well. So you're effectively building a camera system that is completely weather sealed, and then you're attaching a fan to the back of it in order to get that heat out of the engine and out of the CF Express card. So I wouldn't worry too much about the reliability of the fan system in the camera. Frankly, if there's the best possible chance for water incursion in any camera is where the lens meets the mount. And so gasketing and other seals that are on that lens are vital to keep it safe. That's a big hole inside your camera. So that should be your bigger concern. And every camera has the same kind of mount structure with their bayonets. So don't worry about the fan. That's the least likely area you're going to get water incursion or problems.
Yeah. So I want to have a couple of comments here to respond to a couple of the comments that had been coming in here. So, obviously, as we said, cooling fan. One of the things that I think a lot of people may miss, at least here with this particular conversation, is that we've had a camera on the market that supports and utilizes a cooling system for an active cooling system. It's the S1H.
Since 2019.
That camera, since 2019. So this isn't new. This isn't new technology for us to be developing. Its reliability isn't in question. I think if you are concerned about reliability, look at reviews of the S1H. That camera's been out almost 2 years now at this point, and the camera is just rock solid. This is going to be the same thing. It's just such an awesome piece of kit. The other cool thing is that there are people asking questions about noise, fan noise, things like that. The system in these cameras, you have to remember that you're not looking at a fan that's spinning at the speed that, say, your home box fan would run or your home air conditioning fan would run, which run at fast RPMs to create a ton of noise because they have to move a whole bunch of air. These systems run much slower, so they're a lot quieter. Vibration is dampened properly because of the type of fan that's being used, as Matt described. And on top of it, the system has a number of modes so that you can tune it more for your style of shooting. If you're in an environment where it's going to be ridiculously hot out, like I'm in Texas here, you're out in Denver, we get some pretty hot summers in both the areas, depending on where you are. You have the ability to turn the fan on to full speed if you need it. But you also have the ability to leave it in Auto 2, which is how the camera ships, which will automatically turn the fan off when it doesn't need it. So it's only going to ever kick the fan on when it's absolutely necessary, and you have different speeds for it. So as far as audio goes, you're never going to hear the thing. The internal microphones, if you're using the internal microphones, is going to have a really hard time picking it up, especially if you're recording anywhere that's going to have any kind of normal sound running. It's mind-boggling how cool the system is, no pun intended. Let's see here.
So
go ahead.
I've seen a couple of questions about the high-res shot mode and the handheld high-res mode. I've also seen some questions about certain features like live view composite. As of today, the GH6 has no live view composite. And Sean and I don't know if they're going to be adding it to the camera or not. The high-res shot mode is a very cool addition because the stabilization system in this camera has improved radically over the GH5 and even the GH5 Mark II. It's not just that it's 7.5 stops more, more stable. I'm sorry, it's 7.5 stops of stability versus 6.5 stops on the 5 Mark II. There's a much higher precision gyro sensor in this camera, and it gives us better data for stabilizing everything. And so wide angle lenses for video look awesome on the camera with the stabilization system. And that stabilization system helps us to be able to do the handheld high-res shot mode. Plus the sensor's readout speed is substantially faster than any of the other cameras we've ever introduced. So we can execute this much quicker in between, your hand holding it. So shorter interval because of the readout speed, better image stabilization, and the results are really pretty good. Sean's been doing street photography with it, which I think is crazy because you got cars driving in the background. But it's actually smart enough to recognize the movement of those cars, and it auto corrects it and gives you the look of a longer exposure for those cars that were moving. Or if there were high, fast shutter speed, it effectively just picks one sample and gives you the single sample for anything that was moving in the car in the image. It's really good, and I think a lot of people are going to be impressed with that feature.
Yeah, that's probably one of the coolest things is, obviously we've had high resolution shot mode before, and, handheld high resolution isn't necessarily a new thing. And we're not claiming that we're the first to be the ones to do this. However, you now have a camera that has natively higher resolution than any other Micro Four Thirds camera on the market. And you have a handheld high resolution shot mode that doesn't have to go down to a lower resolution. You've got 100 megapixels, whether you're doing handheld or whether you're doing tripod shots. The difference is just going to be how many images it takes to create that and the processing time difference between the two. In my real quick testing here, tripod high resolution shots, I've been able to get down around, I think it takes about like 7-ish seconds to process from the time you shoot. Handheld high-res shots, because it's doing this from many, many more images to put it together, I think I was upwards of around 12 to 16, depending on how long my shutter was and how complex the image was. So this Venus engine that's in this camera is insane what it's capable to do. And, as Matt said, things like live view composite, it'd be cool, but we just don't know at this time, what's coming. The live streaming stuff as well. I heard you mention that. I wasn't purposely not listening to you. I was trying to read through the chat. But, yeah, let's see here. Do you see other questions that you want to jump to while I try to run through here and grab a couple more, Matt?
Yeah, there's been some questions about charging the battery.
Yes.
I've seen like 1 or 2 times. So when you get your GH6, it's going to include obviously the Model 22 battery. It'll include a wall outlet that has a USB port. It'll include a charger and then a USB to USB-C cable. And you can obviously charge right at the charger, or you can plug the camera in to the USB-C and into that wall adapter, and you can charge it that way as well. It's important to note that that wall adapter we give you, if you turn on the camera to use it, it's going to stop charging the battery, but then it'll just power the camera off the wall adapter. If you want to be able to trickle charge your battery at the same time you're powering it, you'll need a different wall adapter. We make, I think it's the BTC15 that can be purchased. That's our official adapter. But realistically, we can't guarantee every USB device, but if they're being honest and it's 9 volts and 3 amps and it has that rating on the device, as long as it's a 9-volt, 3-amp USB PD device, you can plug it right in. So if you want to use external power banks, if you want to use a device that's used for your other computers in your house, yeah, you can absolutely power and charge the battery at the exact same time with the GH6. And then obviously, as we mentioned earlier, eventually that USB output will let you record to external drives as well. So I saw that question that had come up, and I wanted to make sure we got that out of the way.
Yeah. So going through a couple of the kind of generals that have gone through here. So everybody knows, the GH6 is basically, for all intent and purpose, from the video side, a 10-bit camera, you have to dig very, very deep to find 8-bit codecs. They are there.
You
They're
can't
in
do,
the MP4
just so
mode.
you know, you can't do slow-mo. You can't do slow-mo with the 8-bit codecs. The VFR does not work in any of the 8-bit codecs. So,
and that's actually one of the cool things, I
8-bit.
think, for a lot of people, too, is that, you know, VFR now in this camera, while you don't have continuous autofocus, you have push AF at the beginning of it, and you don't have sound, but you have a 10-bit codec now that's actually fairly robust to work with. The high frame rate options, 48 frame native in this camera, 120 native in this camera, and 240 native in this camera, all in 10-bit options, all with varying levels of high bit rate, lower bit rate. This camera is probably one of the biggest jumps forward when it comes to how you can actually use this footage in this camera. And with our system, you still get tracking AF up to 120 frames per second with this camera. So 4K 120, 1080 120, you can go up to the 300 frames per second in the variable frame rate. You don't get autofocus with that, but you've got 300 frames per second. That is ridiculously slow footage when it is slowed down to 24p.
well, and as you mentioned, we have tracking autofocus up to 120 frames per second when you're in the high frame rate mode. But even up to 240 frames per second, you can still press the AF on button on the back of the camera as you're shooting and have the camera readjust focus in real time. So you have that option in the camera as well. So just be aware that now there are going to be some caveats there. It's not every lens is going to be able to do that. It's going to be a select list of lenses. It's all listed on our site. And then if you're in a PAL region, you want to shoot 200 frames because you're delivering 50 frame, you'll need to do firmware updates to your lenses to make the 200 frame autofocus work. So just be aware of that.
Yeah. And actually on that point too, just so that, because I see a couple people asking the same question, HFR modes in the GH6. So 120, or let's start at the bottom, 48 frame per second, 60, 120, and 240 that are selectable in the main recording options all have autofocus and all have audio recording. Variable frame rate, which is how you get to 300 frames per second, doesn't have audio or autofocus. So you still get your audio in the HFR functions for this camera. So it's a big jump up. So let's see here.
Is there a headphone? I heard, is there a headphone jack? No, we were, yeah, I'm joking. Yes, it absolutely has a headphone jack. Sorry. I realize not everybody here is a Panasonic owner, so it's not something that they're aware of. So I probably shouldn't be so snarky with people. Yeah, it absolutely has a headphone jack, has a microphone jack, and we make a device called an XLR1, which you can put through the hot shoe of the camera, and that'll give you a channel 1 and channel 2 input for XLR. And then a great additional feature is that I can actually record the XLR1 and also audio coming into the 3.5 millimeter or the built-in mics. So that's 4 audio channels that you can record simultaneously. So, you know, companies like Saramonic and Rode, they make little, you know, wireless lav systems that give you 2 transmitters, one for each of your interviewees. And then you can put that on to the 3.5. That gives you 2 different level controls for those people. And then you can use, you know, dedicated XLR microphones and use those as your, you know, person 3 and person 4. Some people like to double lav individuals so that they, in case there's a scratch that's happening on like a shirt, they can literally double lav people and use the 3.5 millimeter as scratch audio or as backup audio. So it's a very useful set of features to have in a camera.
Yeah.
And by the way, one addition to the camera that I love that, you know, Sean, I know you have one there. You should show them the audio button. It is such a simple. Once you use this camera, you're going to be wide in every camera manufacturer to do this. It's a simple button that's on the top of the camera.
Hang on. I'm actually, let me see if I can plug, I'm going to see if I can plug the camera into my camera.
Okay, so Sean's going to show you what happens, but we have a little button on the top that you just press, and that immediately brings you into the settings of the camera for the audio. So you can see all 4 levels going. You can make adjustments to everything in real time. It is a very nice addition to the camera. And frankly, I'm shocked we didn't add a button years ago that takes you straight to the audio settings because it's incredibly useful on the product.
Yeah, so you'll see here this little new button up here. When you press this, the back of the camera now gets you this display. Hold it straight.
Yeah, and
that lets
and
you
right now
see
you're just
all
showing
the
2
settings.
channels. Yeah, and right now you only show 2 because you don't have the XLR1 attached. You press the audio button
And
again,
then now you've got all 4 channels.
So I
It's
think that
pretty
this is a
sick.
super easy to use feature.
Yeah. A couple of the other questions that came here. It does support timecode, just like the GH5S does. So you have a cable that comes in the camera that plugs into the port on the front.
And Team Rocket, it absolutely has double card slots. It has a CF Express and it has an SD card slot.
Yep.
And for the vast majority of the codecs, it will record to both simultaneous. As long as your data rate is 800 megabits, it's under 800 megabits. So effectively 600 and under, you can absolutely do backup recording on both card slots.
So I got 2 things that I want to address right away because I see a lot. The Shannon has been asking a number of times. I apologize, we haven't gotten to your question yet. 4K crops. There are no crops in this camera. Everything that you can record, save for 4.4K at 60p, which is the 4:3 aspect ratio, will be full sensor width. So you're not going to have to worry about that area. You do have the ability to... Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, no, finish. I'm interrupting you. I apologize.
So when you have 4.4K, which will get you 60 and 48 frames per second, that will be a slightly crop in on the sensor, but things like 5.7K, 4K, all the way up to 60, full HD, all the way up to 300 frames per second will use the full sensor width for recording. You do have the ability to go in and change image area of recording to pixel if you want more reach. At the downside of no longer using the full sensor to create that resolution that you're outputting at. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in this camera.
Well, and Sean,
yeah,
something I want to point out, it's not just that we have an uncropped image for everything, even up to 120 frames per second. What I think is important to note is that the sensor itself actually can read out 5.7K at 120 frames per second. We just don't have the processing power internally or the thermal management to be able to handle that at this time, or probably ever in this particular chassis. I don't want anybody thinking that's coming in a firmware update. Just don't spread that rumor. That's not the case. But because of this, that means that when you look at 4K 120, it's downsampled from 5.7K 120. So it looks stunningly good. And then on top of that, because of this really fast readout speed, when we go down to 1080 240, it's a simple binning of the sensor. You're not having to do a lot of line skipping. So the 1080 240 looks really good on this camera as well. And even the 300 frame has a really nice look. This is the best looking like high frame rates of 240 and 300 frames I've ever seen in our cameras. Obviously, we've never had 300 before, but the 300 looks better to my eye than the 180 frame looked on the GH5. And so it's really excellent. And all these frame rates, these high frame rates outperform the GH5S hands down. So I think people are gonna really be impressed with that. Plus it's 10-bit at 10-bit 422 at 240 frames per second, which is amazing that you can do that. And it's a no time limit recording option, which is nuts. I mean, if you're working with an editor, they're going to walk off the job, because if you record 1 hour's worth of full high definition at 300 frames per second, you're going to end up delivering 12 and a half hours worth of video content if it's going on a 24 frame timeline. So that's the kind of recording, that's the kind of durability that's built into our system.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's see here. Some of the other questions that I saw came up here. Full-size HDMI port, as would be expected in the LUMIX cameras for like the GH.
We got a question. Can we record vlog in ProRes? Absolutely. Vlog and ProRes, they go together like I don't know, ketchup and mustard. Peanut butter and jelly, spaghetti and meatballs,
French fries and mayonnaise for some of our friends overseas.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Oh yes, this was the other question I wanted to get to. Tip 2 Frog was, can audio input be adjusted below -12 decibels? Yes, it can. It can be adjusted to -18 decibels, as well as the audio in the camera can be set to mute. So you do have the ability to just totally disable all the internal audio input with the video file. So you do have that option.
We also have the 2 gain settings too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Yep. Basically, it's the same kind of audio system that you see with the S1H. So, however,
only better.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, only better. Matt, you want to let them know why?
Well, obviously, you can now record 24-bit 48 kilohertz audio to the internal microphones. I know all of you were just clamoring for that high resolution audio, the internal mics. Actually, the really cool thing is that even the 3.5 millimeter jack can record 96 kilohertz 24-bit audio. So you're getting the same resolution of audio that you'd get through the XLR1. It's not quite as clean or have as clean an analog stage, but it's the same resolution. So you're going to get pretty close matching, especially if you use the right microphone on that 3.5.
Yeah. Let's see here. H.265.
Are we looking into 32-bit? Are we looking into 32-bit float at this time? No, that won't be in the GH6.
Let's see here. H.265 codec. So easy way to tell with the Lumix cameras, at least, is anything that's 420 10-bit is going to be an HEVC or a H.265 compression. Anything 422 10-bit is H.264. So you have plenty of options both ways.
And there's a reason we do 420 10-bit. I know some people want an HEVC codec that's 422 10-bit. And we would like you to be able to edit your video files and hopefully not have to transcode. That's not remotely possible with a 422 10-bit HEVC file. There's no graphics acceleration in any media cards or GPUs that we can find that can accelerate HEVC 422 10-bit. It just doesn't exist. So you would be 100% relying on the processing of your computer to be able to do this, and that's going to be a huge problem. So we work in H.265 420 10-bit because we know a lot of modern computers can work without any real issues. So that's why we chose to do that. Keep in mind that we have a 5.7K 60p option that is HEVC. So that could be a real challenge to edit unless you transcode that footage. So that's why we're working with 420.
Yeah. Let's see here. One of the other questions was, can you punch in for focus when you're can you manually punch in for focus while you're recording? I don't know, Matt, do you want to break it to them?
I'll let you do it. This is your thing.
So, we've listened, and yes, of course you can with the new sensor and processor. The new sensor and the new processor allows us that ability that you can do manual focus with punch in while you're recording video. It's been a long time coming. I know a lot of people have asked us for this. It's now with the new engine and sensor, it's now capable to be done with the GH6. So. Yes.
And Sean and I have a policy on this channel. We try to be honest, or we will be honest with you. So there's a caveat that'll only work up to 60 frames per second. So once we get to 120 frames per second, we won't be able to do the focus assist or the magnification once you're above 4K 60 or 1080 60 for that matter. But I just want to make sure we got that out there because I don't want a bunch of people on the forum saying Panasonic lied to me about this. That's the limitation.
Yeah. So, let's see here. We got time probably for like a couple more questions.
Well, there's one I want to make sure I get to because Fabian has been asking quite a bit, and I want to make sure we get this out of the way because if I don't, I won't be able to sleep at night. So, I'm getting a lot of requests for B-RAW. So we offer B-RAW on some of our cameras over HDMI to be able to use with external recorders. At this time, we haven't made any public announcements about what we're doing with B-RAW. Or if we'll support B-RAW on this camera, but it's being asked multiple times. Some people are asking about B-RAW internal. I saw that on here as well. Keep in mind that, not everything is our choice. There are times where people have IP that they may not feel comfortable sharing, or we may not have a certain function in the camera that would be required to make that specific thing you want work. Sean and I are not the engineers of the product. We don't know what the limitations are for adding B-RAW into a camera. those decisions happen in Japan. I can tell you right now, there are no plans for BRAW internal, and they have not told us if there's any plans for BRAW external over HDMI. So I just want to get that out of the way.
Yeah.
I didn't want a Fabian thinking we were ignoring him on that.
See here. If anyone's looking for sample video footage of the camera, we're not going to live stream it here or anything like that, because live streaming kills the quality of the footage anyway. So it's not going to tell you anything. There's plenty of videos out there right now. You can take a look at our page over on the global page, and there will be sample footage up there. So you guys will be able to take a look at it without having gone through, kind of the YouTube compression. So let's see here. Vlog is Vlog V-Gamut.
Yeah, it's the full Vlog. It's not Vlog L. So not that ultimately, I think that was a bigger deal than people made it out to be. This Vlog is always about how much highlight information the sensor has. We set a rule that we call it Vlog L when it's under a certain dynamic range. The GH6 now exceeds that dynamic range threshold, so it made perfect sense to make it a full Vlog camera. But that's more about sensor characteristics than it really is about the log curve.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we've been going for about an hour for the stream with the launch. So we're going to end up calling it for tonight.
Actually, I want to get to one last thing. So 6K photo mode. So yes, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, Panasonic introduced 6K and 4K photo modes. And these modes were intended to provide high frame rate capture options for photography, using video and allowing you to pull still frames out of it. In 4K photo, it was like an 8 megapixel file. On the GH5, 6K photo was not 6K. It was the density of a 6K file. It was a 5.2K capture. Because now the camera can record in all these video modes in 10-bit internally, you don't put it into a 6K mode or a 4K mode anymore. Just record in the 4:3 aspect ratio, 5.7K, and you're going to effectively get exactly what you would have gotten with the 6K photo mode, bar a few, slight changes in some features we had to offer. So we've elected to just make it a video mode, and you can record it that way, and you can still extract the frames just like you were always able to from the 6K and 4K photo mode.
Yeah. So cool. All right. That's, I think, where we're going to call it tonight. Everyone, if you want to continue these conversations, I hope that you join us on LUMIX Live this Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. We do these broadcasts of forums like this every single week. So we'll definitely be continuing this conversation on Thursday. Outside of that, thank you all so much for joining us. We're sorry we didn't get to every single one of your questions, but obviously there is a lot of questions about the camera. So, yeah. Thank you, Matt, for joining us today, for joining me today. Yeah, I think that's